Hey, welcome everybody to this special edition of Issues of the Heart podcast. I'm your host, Brother Kobe.
I'm Rogers.
Eric Betts.
Today we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Eric Betts. He's going to be sharing with us on his book, Reconciliation, Geopolitical Perspectives of a Black Theologian. I've been knowing Dr. Betts for a number of years, and so it's a privilege to be able to have him on to share his perspective of what he wrote, really what inspired him, some of the different issues that he shares and discusses in the book, and to really break it down on a very simplistic basis, because while you may not understand all the intricacies before reading the book, you have the experience of going through various challenges, perhaps experiencing some of the profiling or some of the other issues that are highlighted in the book, some injustices, slights, etc. But now being able to have the framework of being able to put it together, to be able to see not only from a physical perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, being able to show those. And then, of course, the impact of the scriptures. And so in it, a lot of different things are discussed. And I'd like to start off by first asking you, I know that this was based upon a thesis that you did for your PhD, but what really inspired you to write it? I know there's a wealth of information there, personal experiences and so forth. But really, when it came down to it, what inspired you to write a book like this? Because one could reason, well, hey, there are plenty of books out there, but yours takes a different perspective. But what inspired you to write that, and how'd you go through that whole process?
Yes. Once again, I just wanted to say, appreciate you highlighting this. When I first started off with my writing, the book really was supposed to have been on leadership and conflict management. But as 2020 began with the Breonna Taylor, Arbery, and George Floyd, and simultaneously what was going on in Palestine during that time between the Israelis and the Palestinians, really pushed me to, as I began to write, different insights from that began to be, transmitted into what I was writing. And then after that, as we got into the middle of 2020, these ideas just completely took over my writing, and it just went in a totally different direction. So when those events were happening around the George Floyd, especially, the issue with the Confederate monuments, and then at the very close of 2020, this is what's going on into 2021. If you remember, there was an attack on Black churches in Washington, D.C. By the Proud Boys during that time. One of the things I began to notice within the rallies, and you notice in the book I talk about evangelicals. I don't attach a political party to it, because most of this is driven by the church. And these rallies, you'll see a lot of signs. In January 6th, because that event that took place, I believe it was November, December of 2020, going into 2021, January 6th, they had signs out there literally saying, "Jesus saves." If you remember, at that Black Lives Matter protest in Washington, D.C., which is now called the Black Lives Matter Plaza, you remember before those riot police attacked the protesters, the president went to the St. John's Church across the street, gathered all of his staff, all of his advisors, cabinet members, military people, went across the street and held up a Bible. Now, a lot of people didn't understand what that was about. What he was saying is, all that I'm doing in fighting against these protesters and the ideas that they're trying to bring forth, I'm doing this as a leader, as God's chosen as the leader of this movement, pushing back against those who were trying to assert their humanity during this time. And there's a history behind all of that. So all of that came together. And so every day, events were happening, events were on the news. And so that's what brought together the ideas that you see in the book.
So
Now,
go ahead.
One of the things, looking at the book, I noticed you had the BLM slogan, and I know, like, in the church, I know for me, I can separate the slogan Black Lives Matter too from the organization. And I know many people in the church has issue with the organization based on some of their beliefs, right? Did you think about putting this symbol on the book thinking there might be some pushback, there might be some criticism, there might be some prejudice from people who would need to read it, but they might see the BLM slogan and be like, nah, I don't want to read it just because of that?
Yes, that's a great question. The phrase Black Lives Matter. Let me say this, put it this way. Jesus, because this also goes to why many people reject Malcolm X, because he didn't share the orthodox views of Christians. But if you remember, Jesus talked to the Roman centurion, or used him as an example, this non-Jew, and said, I've not found so great faith. No, not in Israel. In other words, even though people have maybe different religious practices or come from a different background, the imprint of God's image is in all of us. And so the phrase Black Lives Matter, I believe it's a test. God works in mysterious ways. I believe it's a test to evangelicals. You'll find in many discussions between Black faith leaders who also don't agree with everything that the Black Lives Matter. Something very interesting, that evangelicals don't mind embracing Thomas Jefferson, don't mind embracing George Washington. They don't mind embracing John Adams and all of these figures who were deists, who rejected the Bible. But you hold these people up as the standards of civility and morality, but you will reject you will reject a phrase that affirms our humanity based on other ideas that nobody is really talking about or trying to advance. Black Lives Matter is consistent with the gospel. It doesn't matter who's saying it. If someone speaks a truth, we agree with it. We affirm when someone speaks a truth. And when someone speaks something that is not the truth, then we're free to reject those things. And so Black Lives Matter is consistent with what Jesus would say if he saw George Floyd, if he saw Tyree Nichols recently, if he saw Breonna Taylor. He would be saying to the people of America today that why are you doing these things? Why are you not valuing Black lives? And so I believe it's a test, because there have been this was a controversy in evangelical circles between Black clergy and their white counterparts. And it's all connected to the critical race theory pushback as well. Why are you focusing on this theory with all the other theories that are out there? that are not consistent with the faith, why are you not talking about those things, and why are you emphasizing this? And there are Black clergy who have asked, questioned their white counterparts and have asked, "Can you say the words? Can you even say the words?" And they struggle even being able to say the words.
Wow.
Black Lives Matter. So this is a test, I believe, that really exposes what's really lying at the heart of this, and that is really America's original sin.
Mm. You know, speaking to that, reading a book, you know, some people based off that would think that you just dealt with black and white, but you dealt with this issue of hate and racism in various different aspects with various different nations and peoples. And so you look at it from a global scale of, you know, humanity as a whole, this familyhood, right? And so it's not just an issue with black and white as we see in America, but you show and highlight these things from various different nations, which I want to kind of get into a little bit later on, but just on a more global aspect. So it's not just limited to us here in America, but this thing of racism is not limited to a certain group of people, because sin is not limited to a certain group of people. And so you have different nations that are experiencing these things between different nations of people. So can you speak to that?
Yes, yes. You'll see that word a lot in the book. The word familyhood uh, is used, and that word familyhood, it does two things. It 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 includes both genders, so it's gender inclusive, but also it is an African concept, which is consistent with the gospel as well. And the African concept is that we are all tied together, we are all linked together in ways that we don't even understand. And so when Dr. King made the statement, you can't be what you ought to be, and I can't be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, that's the concept of familyhood. And so everybody plays a role in advancing the community. If any part of the community is being hurt, weakened, damaged, demoralized, that hurts everybody. When one side of the community is being that's been hurt is being healed, is being ministered to, it's being restored, then that lifts the entire community up. And so it is a spiritual, as you're talking about the physical and the spiritual, that's the spiritual side that many people overlook. If somebody is hurting on the other side of the tracks, we are all hurting in a sense, even though it's in different ways. So that's the concept of familyhood that was addressed in the book.
One of the things you mentioned in writing the book, you talked about a lot of the events that took place in 2020 that really served as a catalyst to frame your thinking and what you wanted to explore and to discuss. With that in mind, as you look back, removing politics, Republican, independent, Democrat, and so forth, or even people's own personal religions and so forth. I know you really drove at the core of issues. But my question to you is, when considering those events and the track that America's going down, in regard to the issue of the original sin, as you called it and framed it, what are some of the dangers that you see that await us as a society if we choose to act as though everything is fine? And I know that there's some that would say, push back, well, hey, how could you say some of these shine a spotlight when, Barack Obama was president of the United States? He reached the highest pinnacle in the Western world. How can you say that there is an issue when Kamala Harris is the first woman and the first Black woman of color as well, to be vice president? You know, we have all these advancements and the accolades and so forth. So how can we say that? So that's really two questions. One, how can you say that? And then two, what is the danger that you see if these issues are not really addressed and corrected and reconciliation takes place?
Oh, yes. One of the things that we talk about in the book is the difference between individualism and familyhood. And so in America's history, they've always, during the Reconstruction, during Roosevelt's time, they've always held up the success of individual Black people, or to say, hey, we're making progress. The failure of the evangelicals is that they lack insight so too often on the community as a whole. They have the tendency to look at everything on a micro level rather than looking at a macro level. So while you're holding up the individuals that have succeeded, that have broken through, we still see the daily realities of what I would call the man on the street and the struggles that he's facing. So while we are inspired by what, for example, right now, all of the major cities are led by Black mayors. But we see at the same time, simultaneously, we see pushback on African American studies in classrooms. We see the doubling down on funding for the police. Just recently in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. Mississippi actually has the largest population of Black people. Jackson, being the capital, is almost 100% Black. There's a plan in place right now because the capital is there, to take over the entire city and establish a court system, because you see the legislature establishes these judicial districts. So right now, what they're doing is they're trying to set up another court system just to be able to make decisions concerning the citizens in Jackson, Mississippi. So while there's progress, that progress has led to pushback, or what we call white backlash. So with every time we make progress, there's some kind of backlash. And what 2020 revealed is that the backlash is not political, it's actually religious, because it's coming out of the Black Lives, should I say the evangelical movement. So we're not going to act as if there's no progress being made whatsoever. It's almost, there's two parallel tracks going on. There's Black progress, but the progress still is not on the level of economically and politically where those at the top of the social hierarchy are. We're still not there. We're ways from getting there. And simultaneously, there are actions, there are decisions that are being made that are taking us back. The anti-woke agenda that you see coming out of Florida and out of many places in America, there's a pushback to the progress that has been made. So every time you have progress, there's there are political forces that will seek to push back against that progress. And so you asked the question, what is the end result if America continues down this path? And what I see is what is already happening. America would be far ahead of where it is now if the evangelical community would completely embrace this message of reconciliation. America is weak today because it is so divided. Someone made a statement that the people who are at the top make the people who are lower than them feel secure because there's someone there are also those who are even lower that they can step on. So rather than targeting the people who are at the very top, the powers that be are using them to keep people at the bottom, making sure and to make sure that they stay at the bottom. So what we find it is a weakening of America's influence politically, its influence morally. We already see that many that nations are moving away from America, and others are beginning to rise up to take its place. America could have been a force for good in the world if it had fully embraced the gospel. Because one of the things that the evangelicals have done and many Christians have done, they've limited salvation to only personal salvation. And they've forgotten all about the story of the Good Samaritan, that we have work to do to save people, working in cooperation with Christ to save people from the suffering that exists in the world. So I see America being weakened economically, being weakened politically. I see its influence waning as a result of this. And the people who are pushing the idea of patriotism are going to be sorely disappointed, because the stubbornness that comes along with patriotism is we're the only ones who get to criticize America. Anyone else who criticizes America, the idea is go back where you came from. But if America was to ever embrace or to sit down and listen to the criticism, it would be in a better place. What that looks like, we're unsure. Dr. King talked about, I mentioned this in the book, that as a result of the pride and the arrogance that we see, that it could lead to major catastrophic events, because America fails to reach out and work with people that she disagrees with. So, and we're talking about violence, we're talking about Dr. King, nuclear exchange, because what we see going on, we're looking at, a lot of times we look at what's going on locally here in America, but what goes on here is just really a reflection of what's going on in other places as well. As Malcolm X said, in order to understand what's going on in America, you got to understand what's going on in the Congo. It's all connected. And so that's why the book talks about geopolitical perspectives. America's unwillingness to listen to its Black population, Native American population, is the same spirit that causes it not to listen to those in other parts of the world as well. So that's what we're looking at as far as where this may end up in the future.
So America and the world, we have a choice to make, individually and collectively. Do we continue down the same road, or do we look for an alternative pathway that Jesus marked out? There talks about reconciliation. Again, that's what the main emphasis of your book was on. One, hey, what is the problem? And then two, here are examples. And then three, here's the solution. Here's the ultimate solution that we'll be able to work toward. Unless we can really come and sit down at the table of brotherhood, then we're not going to get there. We'll have a lot of great attempts and so forth, but we are, if we can't figure it out, we're going to all end up perishing together. So we can't live together, we're going to perish together, as Dr. King also stated. So there's a lot I know that we want to jump into, and we're going to come back and deal with some of those things you talked about with reconciliation. And but just looking at the time, I know our time is gone for our first our segment together. And so I just want to remind you of the true proverb to keep your heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life.